All right, folks, we are now going to work on the Module 1 lab. I do want to point out right at the top of the thing, we do say that this has a part A and a part B, and you can write these both into the same program file. So you don't have to do two separate programs for this, right? That won't always be the case, but for this scenario. The layout of this assignment is relatively simple, but this is a pretty typical pattern for the homework in this class. We have a programming prompt, which is basically a set of instructions of what you're doing. And then we also have a sample output of what the program should look like when it's running. And the reason we provide that is that tells you how to structure your output. Now, what I will also say about the output is like you don't have to follow what we have here precisely. You could make it look nicer. You could space it, whatever you want to do. You want to do ASCII art in there, go for it, that kind of thing. But at the very least, you should shoot for what's here. It doesn't have to be super fancy. All right, let's look at the first programming prompt. And it says, write a program that takes two numbers as input. It should print the sum of the two numbers, the difference, and the product. The program should then ask for a width and height and print the area. All right, and here's a sample program run. So you input one number, input the other. It does addition, does subtraction, and multiplication. Notice it shows the calculation in the output. And then we'll prompt for an input width and an input height, right? And what kind of calculation is that? That's multiplication, right? Hopefully you know that, right? But if you're looking for area, and this is another tip, I give people, it's like if you don't know the formula for something, you could just go to Google and say formula for area, for example. And okay, and that's not what I was looking for. Usually it'll just give me a straight up, oh, here you go. Area equals length times width, right? There you go. It just had to get a little bit more fancy, but I think it's pretty interesting. A lot of formulas that you look for, you can just straight up throw them in Google. It'll come back. It'll even have a little box where you can calculate stuff at times. So that's the tool that you can utilize. All right, let's go ahead and start building this. I'm going to go to Visual Studio. I'm going to start a new project here. It will be a C# console app. Let's call this Module 1 Lab. And it's going to be lab A and B. So if you want to say A and B, I'm just going to say module 1. How about module 1 labs, plural? I'm looking at the folder here. That looks good for me, right? But make sure you put it somewhere that matters or where you can find it later is the important thing. Don't just throw it on your desktop, for example. All right. I'm going to stick with .NET 8 here. I'm going to leave that box unchecked. And here we have the beginning of our program. So I'm going to kind of delete what's there, and I'm going to get ready to write the code. So let me just get ready here to kind of output this. And what I'm going to do here is I am going to put a little label at the top. You don't have to do this, by the way. Module 1 Lab A. That's what's going to be right below here. As we're kind of working through this stuff here, I want you to think about what the first question was that you were asked, which is to basically prompt the user for information, right? And what kind of information are we getting from the user? Is it text or is it numbers? Yeah, numbers, right? That's what we're working with. And so what we want to kind of do here is look at how do we capture a number? Do you guys remember that when we're capturing stuff from the keyboard, it does come in as text, right? So we do have to do a conversion. I don't know if you guys recall that, right? Yeah, okay. So let's write a prompt. Here's the other thing I'm thinking about in my head. How many variables are we going to have here when we start out? We're going to input one number and then input another number. So one thing I could do, and I'm just kind of throwing it out here, is I could have one number and another number. And I just declare them first, and then I can do a prompt. That's one approach, and I'm not going to do that. Right? This time, what I'm going to do is I'm going to go right to the console write line. So let's get that going. Oops, let's see if I can type it first. Right, parentheses, and actually, this is a prompt, so I don't want write line. I want write, right, because I want the cursor to stay at the end of the line. So here I'm going to say input first number. Here's another thing I often tell my students. It's like if you want an integer, maybe you should tell them to enter an integer. You know, you don't have to do that part of it. I do think that it doesn't matter what kind of program it is. The more info you give your user, the better off you are, right, generally speaking. Then we're going to capture that, and we're going to store it in a variable. And okay, let's do this. Let's set up a variable. This is where we're going to capture it. And let's just call it num1. I can't think of anything better right now. And we're going to capture from the command line. So if you guys remember this, console read line and parentheses. However, this captures what? Text. So we have to wrap around it that convert statement. So here you do this, convert dot to int 32, and then parentheses. I typed a dot by mistake. And then if I'm putting a parenthesis here, I want to get the console read line statement completely inside of it, right? So this is the complete statement. Another thing too, and I guess I didn't do this part of the lecture, but there is this concept in programming where we do input, process, output. And this is the input part of the program. We're getting input from our user. So I'm just going to label it that way. I'm going to leave a blank line. We're going to prompt for another number. It's going to be kind of the same process, right? So why retype it? Just copy, paste, change the variable name to a different name. Num2 sounds pretty good to me. And then let's change the prompt so they know they're not typing the same thing again. And say input second number. You guys all good? All right, so we're good so far. And now that we have that information, we're going to do some processing and some output at the same time. So we're going to get some values in and output. And we could go back here, and they just said input first number, input second number. They said nothing about integers. That's okay. I did. And then they want us to display the number with the correct sign and ultimately the answer, right? So we got to like engineer that statement and do the math. Here's the interesting thing. In a console write line statement, I can do the math directly in the statement. I'm going to do this a couple of different ways just so you can see the different formats. So in one of them, I'm going to use a concatenation approach to show you why it's not a good idea, why it's messy. Then I'm going to use string interpolation to do the remainder of it, right? Just to give you a flavor of both. But I do think ultimately string interpolation is really the best way to do it. All right, so I'll do the first one. So let's do a console dot, this will be a write line. Let's put our parentheses in and our semicolon. And now I'm going to go back inside and type up my statement. So how should the output look? Well, I have the example here. So I should have the number, then the plus sign, then the number, then an equal sign, then the answer. Okay, so I got that in my head. All right, so we want the number. What's the first number? Num1 will go up on the screen. We'll concatenate to it the plus sign. So we're going to go space plus, oops, I didn't put in my double quotes, space plus space. Then I'm going to concatenate again. And now I'm going to put in the second number, num2. Do you guys notice that I'm kind of leaving space between stuff? This is kind of how I always did it. It doesn't matter. Like here, I could get rid of these spaces. I don't have to have those there. I just think it's easier to look at this way. That's me, right? You can make your own choice on that. So num space plus space, the next number, now I need the equal sign. So now I'm going to concatenate more text. So it's going to be space equals space. Then I'm going to concatenate the calculation. So inside a set of parentheses, I'm going to add the two numbers together. So I'm going to say num1 plus num2. Okay. So if your brain right now is saying to you, could you have calculated the value, stored it in a variable, and then just output the variable? Yes, totally. You could have done it that way. That's fine. That's not how I chose to do it. If you want to know the why, it's like I don't plan to use that value again. I'm just doing it once and I'm putting it on the screen. If I needed to use it again in the program, I would totally put it in a variable. See the thinking, right? All right. Can we just make sure this works? We don't have to write the whole program right now. We don't, right? I mean, let's just try this part of it and see if we're at least on the right track. Does it look okay? And does it kind of work? All right, let's input a number. Let's make it really easy numbers to work with, like 1 and 2, right? Because we know the answer to that one. All right. So 1 plus 2 equals 3. That actually looks pretty good, I think, right? And I forget, do they allow you to change oh yeah. Control plus works in the command prompt though. How wonderful is that? Yeah. All right, that looks pretty good, I think, right? All right, let's close that. Let's move on to the next one. This time though, we're going to use the console write line, but we're going to use string interpolation. So I'm going to put in the $sign. That tells us that we're using string interpolation. Then I go into double quotes. So instead of doing this concatenation quotes with plus signs and oh my God, it gets confusing, right? I don't know if you guys feel that or not. Now I can just put in the values directly, but inside of the quote. So for example, I can here enter in num1, right? Come out of the curly brackets, put in my plus sign like regular text. Then I'm going to display num2, put in a space, equal sign, and then I want to do the calculation, which I can do inside of curly brackets, and I can just say num1 plus num2, or if I did the calculation elsewhere, I could just drop in the variable name. All right, but here's what I did wrong. We're supposed to do subtraction on this one. Okay, let's fix that. That's what you get for copying me, by the way. All right. I'm going to go ahead and hit run again. I know this is kind of silly. Why you hit and run now is like what your brain should say. It's because I want to. I want to see that this works and it looks okay, right? And I'll use some different numbers. More complicated numbers, 2 and 5. Looks pretty good, right? I subtracted 5 from 2, so I got a -3. That's right, isn't it? Yeah, that's right. So negative numbers work too. All right, let's keep moving along. Now we need the product. And here's what I'm going to do. If string interpolation really is the way, I can really quickly change this to a product, right? Just come in here, change these two characters, and I'm all set. I have high confidence that this will work. All right. There's another task inside this assignment, right? So task number 2, which is the area calculation. And if you look at the suggested output, you're going to be asked basically to ask for a width. Notice how I made a fancy prompt there with the double arrows. Pretty cool. Not really, but I'm humoring myself. And then I could come up with a variable called area, perhaps. No, this would be width, right? So maybe I have like so would this be an integer? Yeah, let's stick with the integers right now. So I'll make this an int, and I'm just going to call it width. Notice how it's auto-suggesting the exact correct code I would type. What am I going to do? I'm going to press tab and accept it. Use the force, Luke. You know, basically. Use IntelliSense, Luke. It's there, right? Um, we're going to do height now. It's almost identical, right? We just have to change a few words. Height. We'll change our variable here to height. You know, I can spell it. So we got the info is now captured. And you know what? I think I can go right to the calculation. So let's just come down here, do a console.write line, and inside the parens, I am going to do string interpolation. And here I'm just going to say, what did I do last time? I just said area equals, and then I'm just going to do the calculation right here, brute force, and we're going to multiply width times length, just like that. Why is it underlining red? Be mindful that sometimes I type the wrong code on purpose. Because I used width and height, right? Not width times length. Okay. Does it really matter? Of course it does, right? Because I didn't capture length, so I can't calculate it. So let's turn this one into length. That fixes the problem. All right, let's run this. Make sure that works. So we still have to do the first one. This time, let's have fun and put in some larger numbers. Yay, it works. All right, now we're going to do input width. And let's do some numbers we can calculate. Let's just do 10 and 20. What's the area? 200. Working pretty good. All right, let's move on to part B. And so I'm going to just put in a comment here and just say lab B. And we'll just start down there. All right, let's look at the instructions. Now, I'm going to say it is 10 o'clock. If you guys need to go, you can go. If you want to hang out and get the answer for the lab, hang out and get the answer for the lab. All right, because I'm gonna roll on this. All right. All right. So this is for a simple. Says write a program that asks the user how many cupcakes they want to make. The output should be the list of ingredients based on the following recipe, with the amounts of the ingredients adjusted for the requested number of cupcakes. A simple cheese cupcake recipe has the following ingredients and makes 8 cupcakes. All right, this sounds like math, right? Yeah, big time. All right, so to make 8 cupcakes, I need 4 eggs, 1 cup of sugar, 3 packages of cream cheese, and 1 teaspoon of vanilla. Okay, that yields 8, right? So we're gonna have to figure out, like, if they type in a different number, like for example, like if you look below, how many cupcakes would like to make 4? You have to modify the recipe in your math and give them the right output. Notice that some of that output is in decimal format because all the numbers up above are whole numbers 4, 1, 3, and 1. But if they only have 4 cupcakes, then we need half as many. So 2 eggs, half cup sugar, 1.5 packages of cream cheese, and a half teaspoon of vanilla. All right. So let's just go through the process here. Let's write the prompt to begin with because that part's easy, right? So here comes my prompt. And yes, I'm doing a little copy paste to accelerate things. How many cupcakes do you want to make? All right. What I did here, and I thought this was kind of a good way to handle it, and maybe you didn't think of it like this, but if one batch makes 8 and they're typing in a number, I can come up with a ratio based on the number they type in. So if they type in 4, that's half as much. If they type in 16, that's twice as much. And I can figure out that ratio in advance and then just multiply it against or divide, depending on how you're looking at it, against the value that they're supposed to use for a batch of 8. You see the thinking, right? So I'm going to do this calculation in advance, and I'm going to store it in a double. I'm going to call it ratio, and then that ratio will propagate through. And what I'm going to do is normally it produces 8 cupcakes, but I want to make sure that it converts to a decimal number. So I'm going to say 8.0. I'm going to force it to cast to a double. And then whatever cupcake amount I capture. Oh, I forgot to do that. All right. So I didn't do the capture. All right. So here's the capture. The number of cupcakes has to be a whole number. Nobody's going to ask for half a cupcake. Why would you? All right. So this is the capture. All right. So we prompt, grab the read line, convert to an int, drop it in cupcakes. And now I'm going to divide this 8.0 by cupcakes, which is an integer. I find it interesting that it's like mistyping it in a weird way. Okay, there we go. Now, what I'm going to do, once again, you could do the calculation separately, store them, and output the variables. That's on you if you choose to do it that way. But what I'm going to do instead is I'm going to use kind of like a different approach here. Basically, I'm once again I'm going to do the calculations directly in the output. Right? Why? Because I'm not going to use these values again. Is really the answer. So here's my right line. I'm just going to go string interpolation all the way here. Right? That's not the only way to do it, but this is, I think the preferred way to do it. I'm going to say modified recipe for, all right, how many cupcakes are we working with? Well, they typed it in up there. So let's just put that value here, cupcakes. And then let's put in probably a colon. Or let's see how do they do the output here? Okay, so they just had it as one statement like that for X number of cupcakes. So that will just be text. No punctuation or anything. Close your parens and your semicolon. Next line. So we're going to console right line again. And then inside here, once again, we're going to go to string interpolation directly. And we're going to say, well, we got to convert the eggs, right? So here inside of parentheses, I have to do the calculation. What's the calculation? How many eggs do we normally use? Well, that's a given, right? It's 4 eggs. So we're going to take 4 and divide it by the ratio, right, in the calculation. So here I'm going to say 4 divide by ratio. And then add the word eggs after it. Right? Now that we have the eggs, now we just have to modify our formula a few times, right? We have 4 ingredients. So we have cups of sugar, packages of cream cheese. And down here, teaspoons of vanilla. Right, now we just have to fix the numbers with the cups of sugar. I can just look at this chart, right? That would be 1, 3, and 1 are the ratios, right? Are the numbers that we just drop in here. So we put in 3 here, no, 1 here, 3 here, and 1 here. And folks, that's all of it. That's complete. All right, let's see if it works. A good test number is to put in the number 4 because that's a really easy one to figure out, right? So let's just run it. Of course, we have to get the other stuff on the screen also. So I'm just going to kind of move it over. I know you guys are still copying my code, so that's fine. Make it so you can do that. So let's do the first part. Let's do a width and a length or height. And how many cupcakes would you like to make? Let's do 4. Excuse me. Is that the correct output? It is. Let's run it again. And once again, these numbers don't matter except I just crashed it. Okay, so sorry about that. Gotta be careful what you type here. So we'll run it again. Just make sure we use some whole numbers. And this time let's double it because that's an easy one to figure out too. So 8 eggs, 2 sugar, 6 cream cheese. Okay. Now let's give it a challenge. Run it again. And let's pick like a weirder number, like, I don't know, 11, something like that. Oh, yeah, not for this part. And then we have to assume that this is correct. All right, I don't want to have to measure 1.375 cups of sugar, but I could get close. And you could do conversions to ounces or whatever you want to do. Is everybody getting this to work? No issues? All right. I'm going to go ahead and stop the recording.